We're going to do something a little bit different tonight. We're going to try to understand some of the most important and disruptive Trump policies through the prism of one aide, Stephen Miller. He's no ordinary aide, as you well know. He's been with Trump since the beginning of his improbable run as the 21st century's most important political leader, and no one seems to understand the president and his impulses better than Miller. He's also a revolutionary. His ideas come from far outside what we used to think of as the Republican mainstream, and he's a vociferous, uncompromising advocate for policies that only a few years ago would have been deemed unworkable and extreme. Joining me tonight are four reporters who have covered Miller for years and know him well. Leanne Caldwell is the chief Washington correspondent at Puck. McKay Coppins is a staff writer at The Atlantic. Zolan Kano-Young is a White House correspondent at The New York Times. And Ashley Parker is a staff writer, also at The Atlantic. Thank you all for joining me. All of you have covered Miller for years. You've written a lot about Miller. Ashley, you very recently, Leanne, very recently. But I want to just start at the beginning. McKay, why don't I go to you, because you wrote the sort of definitive early profile of Stephen Miller in 2018. So where does he come from? Like, where did his politics develop? Give us a little sense of the forces that created the Stephen Miller we know of today, before he entered the general political consciousness.
Yeah, I think the thing that most struck me in talking to him years ago when I was profiling him was how much of his political worldview was forged in opposition to his upbringing, right? He grew up in Santa Monica, family of very well-off, progressive Jewish parents, and was surrounded by what he would describe as kind of a bubble of progressive affluence, right? He went to a high school where they would have, multiracial retreats and, multiculturalism festivals. And his first exposure to conservative politics was actually reading on a lark Guns and Ammo magazine, which then led him to people like Rush Limbaugh, Larry Elder, David Horowitz, the kind of prominent conservative talk radio hosts and polemicists of the time. And you can see from the very beginning, as a teenager in a very liberal high school, him kind of mimicking the political style of those people.
Wait, you mentioned the high school. Just watch with me for one moment a quick clip of this is Stephen Miller running for
student government.
Government. Watch this.
Am I the only one who is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash? And we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us.
So first of all, the Che Guevara look really doesn't do that anymore. He's really into the silk suits now or something. But you wrote, part of your profile was focused on the fact that he's an expert troll. Yeah. And so in your study of him and your conversations with him back then, was he just trolling his liberal friends or liberal adversaries, or was that something more serious?
Well, this was actually kind of the mystery of Stephen Miller to everybody who knew him at every stage of his life. In high school, later at Duke, when he went to college, everyone was trying to figure out if this was performance art or if he really believed it. And that was a classic example of teenage Stephen Miller. But he would write, columns for the Duke campus newspaper, picking culture war fights on campus. What I think, where I landed, because I asked him about this a bunch of times, and he at first would say, no, I believe everything that I say. But then he, at one point, said, I do believe in constructive controversy for the sake of enlightenment. Those were his words. And I think that gets at something fundamental about him, which is he has always believed that there is a role for provocation and performance in politics.
So, actually, let me ask you this. Does he go further rhetorically than he actually believes? Or when you're listening to him, especially in this second Trump term, is what he's saying what he actually believes? Is he trying to just provoke and kind of then he'll bring it back a little bit?
I mean, again, I think with him at this point, both things are true, but but we have sort of come full circle to where the caricature has become the character, and it's really hard to differentiate. You see in some of those early high school videos of Stephen Miller, him sort of occasionally breaking the fourth wall to kind of do a full-faced, toothy grin or kind of almost smirk at himself as if he can't believe he's said what he's just said. But in reporting my profile, one of the people I spoke with was Steve Bannon, who recounted, I mean, early on, Stephen Miller would open for Donald Trump in 2015, in 2016, that campaign, at his rallies. And Steve Bannon, again, who loves all the incendiary stuff, recalled saying to Stephen Miller, look, the point of an opening act is so the main guy doesn't have to top you, right? You have to stop saying these things because Trump can't come out there and beat it. And so people have told me in the White House, one of the things they like about him, perhaps counterintuitively, is that he is incredibly dogmatic. That intensity, maybe not the trolling, but that intensity and that passion is the same behind closed doors and in the Oval Office as you see in front of the TV cameras. And so whether you agree with him or not, you sort of always know where he stands, which is on the far extreme when it comes to immigration.
Zolan, you've watched this for a while as well. Has his ideology shifted? And we'll talk about the linchpins of the ideology in a minute, but has he shifted? Has he become more extreme? Because obviously the second Trump term is very much unlike the first Trump term.
Sure. I actually think from everyone I've talked to that Stephen's ideology has been rather consistent. It's that he's more visible and more powerful in this second term. You know, in the first term, he might have been limited in many ways to being kind of the architect and overseeing immigration policy in the Department of Homeland Security. And he was a speechwriter, of course, you know, getting involved in comms as well. And now you have somebody who, you know, is taking that ideology that was formed through his upbringing, through working with Michelle Bachmann, now to imposing that on domestic policy, foreign policy as well. Yeah. His role has expanded. If I could also follow up on the previous subject, I think that the rhetoric and the provoking, Stephen also sees that as key to implementing his policy, right? I mean, in the first term...
Shelling the beach in advance of the actual policy...
And he believes that America, as you often hear of America having a role as a sanctuary for immigrants, being a pro-immigrant country, he is trying to change the perception in the nation towards immigrants to basically make it so that the pendulum of politics shifts and there's more of a tolerance for the policies he's trying to implement.
Leanne, talk about, so we know he was a expert at provocation. He was a serious conservative, more conservative than Republicans at the time as he was growing up. He comes to Washington. Talk about his course through Congress until he meets Trump.
Yeah, well, yes, as you said, he worked for Michelle Bachmann, who is this...
Remind us.
Michelle Bachmann is someone who actually ran for president in 2008. She was a fringe candidate, an outlier, and she was also very provocative. She crashed and burned very quickly. She was
a little bit ahead of her time in terms of... She was
kind of pre-Trump,
Lauren
before
Boebert
Trump.
before Lauren Boebert kind of person.
Yeah, absolutely. But then he found a home in Jeff Sessions, Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, who was also very anti-immigrant. And ideologically, they were on the same page. Jeff Sessions was adamantly involved in comprehensive immigration reform during, the Bush and early Obama years, Bush years really, and trying to kill it. And Stephen Miller was instrumental in that. He had a reputation on the Hill. He was a comms director at the time of being way outside the mainstream. He would also, in internal comms meetings with his fellow Republican comms directors, would provocate in the same way that he does publicly. People used to just roll their eyes and dismiss him. Now he is probably the most powerful non-elected official in this country. And you still see actually that tension on Capitol Hill with Stephen Miller. People remember Stephen Miller then, and there is a lot of grumbling on Capitol Hill, even among Republicans who think that Stephen Miller's policies are going too far and will hurt them.
Right. It's hard just briefly to overstate. I covered the Gang of Eight immigration bill for the New York Times as a congressional correspondent. And this was sort of the last time bipartisan immigration had any real momentum, right? You had 4 Republicans, including Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, 4 Democrats. You had the tentative cautious, but you had the buy-in of the tech community, of the business community, of the labor community, of the activist community, of the Hispanic community. And the reason that bill essentially sank and did not come up for a vote in the House was single-handedly because of Jeff Sessions and Stephen Miller working alongside Breitbart News to kill it.
And remember, just during the end of the Biden administration, when James Lankford was working on a bipartisan bill to close the borders, and then Trump came in as a potential candidate and killed it, Stephen Miller had a role in that, too.
Right. Well, let's talk about Sessions and the jump from Sessions to try. Obviously, Sessions, we don't have to rehearse this one at length, but was a Trump loyalist, and Trump turned on him because Jeff Sessions appointed the special prosecutor, et cetera. How did Miller make the move to the big man?
So,
I mean, it's a classic Washington story also. It's not that unusual. But did he discard Jeff Sessions when?
Not yet.
Okay.
So what happened is in January of 2016, Miller was one of the very first people to come and leave Jeff Sessions' office and go to his campaign.
And this is when Trump was still improbable.
Yes, very improbable, before the Iowa caucuses, a good month before then. But Jeff Sessions, a month later, was the very first senator to endorse Donald Trump. And so they were still very close, working together to promote this enigma of Donald Trump.
Interesting.
But then, fast forward to Jeff Sessions being Attorney General, Jeff Sessions recusing himself into the Russia investigation, right. Jeff Sessions losing his job, being fired because of that, and the person left standing is Stephen Miller, who discarded Jeff Sessions at that moment.
When you say discarded, what do you mean?
There was no public statement of Stephen Miller supporting or saying anything nice about Jeff Sessions in that moment. And then a person close to Stephen Miller said that no one at that time was more furious at Jeff Sessions than Stephen Miller.